I'll ask each of you to kind of just spend a minute to introduce yourselves and your work, especially around the digitalization and AI of the power sector before I move into specific questions. So, Mahesh, I think you've already spoken about MPN systems. Siddharth, if I can request you.
Thank you, Navin. Is this on?
I think you have just move this to the right.
Okay. Thank you, Nalin. So it's a pleasure to be here, and this is my first time walking in today for the AI summit, and I'm glad it went smoothly after the entry.
After you got in.
So of course, I'm Siddharth Singh. I work at the International Energy Agency. I lead the Energy and AI work program at the agency along with a colleague, and we have a big team. We have a team of around 50 people drawn from across the agency who deal with all aspects of the system. So this goes well beyond electricity,
Yep.
but of course electricity, as you rightly said, is integral and core to the work we do.
Right.
So I work broadly in the team of the chief energy economist of the IEA. So I'm an economist by training. So my lens usually is economics as opposed to core engineering. But of course, AI being a technology, it's important to understand the various facets of it, which include technology, which include the technical aspects, but also legislation, regulation, commercialization, and so on.
Got it. Thank you. Namrata, if I can request you.
Hi, thank you so much, Nalin and Climate Collective team for having me here. I'm Namrata Mukherjee. I'm a strategic planning specialist at the International Solar Alliance. I joined the alliance only last year in June, and before that was working with the USAID South Asia Regional Energy Partnership Program, where we partnered with the Climate Collective in the Electron Vibe program. So great work by the team there. At the International Solar Alliance, what we are doing on the digitalization space, at least, I don't know if it is AI so much, but I would like to comment that we have something called a multi-donor trust fund, where we have donors like GAP, Sequoia Capital, and others, pooling in their funds. The objective is very clear, that the solar deployment story is incomplete without the grids being able to, sort of offtake the complex power which comes in the form of solar and other variable renewable energy sources. So through the multi-donor trust fund, we are trying to do, scalable pilots in Jaipur distribution utility, where we're looking at, developing a digital utility twin of the existing utility, and then looking at how we bring in efficiency from a loss reduction standpoint. So that's the current piece of work that we are doing with, International Solar Alliance in partnership with different funding partners. So, yeah.
Thank you, Namrata, and thank you. Namrata mentioned our work together as well in the Maldives. That was quite a pioneering program. Thanks for support there. All right, we'll jump into the discussion now. The way we're going to structure this is in three parts. One is to understand what AI is really doing for the grid today, right? And this is not what's happening in theory, but really what's happening in real life. Second is how are pilots getting to become large-scale deployments in India and across the global south. So we have international perspective here, of course. And then how do we ensure that the grid becomes truly digitalized and AI powered? So that covers data, compute, trust, and flexibility, right? So that maybe I'll start with you. So from global evidence and the kind of work that you do, which AI applications in power are delivering the strongest system level benefits today? And from that, what do you see the key opportunities for India?
Sure, thank you. So maybe I can start by taking a step back and just contextualizing and understanding why is it that we are talking about this in the first place. Sure. What is it about the energy system, about the electricity system, and about AI that make all of this work? Sure. Right? We have been noticing, at the agency we collect data. We collect all sorts of data, and the data goes back for several decades. And we are seeing a very strong trend of increasing complexity of the energy sector at large, but specifically the electricity systems, right? So why is it becoming more complex? One is that in general, the electrification is rising. So when I say electrification, it means the end use of energy is more and more electricity compared to other fuels. Right. In other words, that there are more types of demand and more types of loads that previously never existed that are now increasingly a part of the load. So one is that there's greater electrification. The second is that there is greater, of course, this is not news to anyone, but there's greater variable renewable electricity
Yep.
going into the system. So that was never the case in the past. In the past, the variability maybe came in the form of hydropower, but that was also seasonal in nature.
Yeah.
Most of the other sources of electricity were stable. That's no longer the case. Now, with solar and wind, the share of variable renewables has gone from as low as 2 or 3%, just over a decade ago. This is a global level, right?
Sure.
To and it's on track to hit 30% by the end of this decade. This is a massive jump of variable electricity in the system. There's, of course, in addition to that, there's increasing batteries to manage that the variability, and there are new types of markets. Back in the day, everything was contracted for years at end. Now
Long-term PPAs,
it's like there are derivatives of things, and it's a financialization of the sector has happened. So
Right.
first trend is electrification. The second is more recent, which is that there is an affordability issue that is becoming more and more central to policymakers and regulators around the world. Gone are the days when electricity was, heavily subsidized around the world. That still exists in many parts, maybe even in India to some extent, but that's less and less the case at a global level. So affordability is an issue. Especially with all the conflict and all of that happening, it's a priority for governments to ensure that electricity is cheap.
Right.
And of course, the third major trend is that now we have long-term goals that never existed in the past. That we have, 2070 or a 2050 or a 2030 net zero target.
Yep.
Be it at a company level or a country level, or and so on, and that those long-term targets have short-term implications. So these three trends, I think, are the driver to why human intervention is not enough.
Yeah.
You need something bigger than that. You need something that is more automated, and this is where it comes in. And again, I don't want to take too much time, but one final point on because and I want to address the question that you actually asked, which is that because the inherent nature of electricity and electrified systems makes AI applications the most appropriate kind of technology layer that can manage that complexity. And just naming one or two things that are especially critical for India. One is improved forecasting of variable electricity generation. And when I say it's not just about the weather models are becoming more accurate, fine, but that's not enough. For solar and wind, you need minute by minute, hour by hour understanding of cloud cover in the specific location where that panel is situated, which is different from just having more accuracy around the world. So that's just one example. So that, and then the managing the a system that has batteries and on solar generation and so on. Those are the types of solutions that will be more relevant for India moving forward.
Very nice. I think so it's a very nice framework. So complex loads, variable generation, and then the imperative of affordability. I think this is really some of the driving factors. And for everyone, this is the right framing. Variable renewables versus you'll often hear intermittent renewables. In fact, variability is a far better way of describing what we see on the grid. Great, thank you, Siddharth. Namrata, if I can come to you, and this is of course your broad experience. This is it's your broad experience at RTI, now at ISA. What are the real world applications that you're seeing going from pilots, and obviously the Duet, you can talk about Duet as well, going from pilots to deployment, and what has kind of pleasantly surprised you in that?
Okay, thanks for that question, Nalin. Look, I think from what's working well, let's start from there. And I think I echo what Siddharth was saying. The renewable energy phenomena now is more than a decade old, right? I mean, we started with the solar mission, initial phases, then we saw a lot of wind coming on board because of the policy reforms around accelerated depreciation, generation-based incentive and others.
Right.
So the ingress of renewable energy in our grid is not a very recent story. It's been there for close to a decade. And if we start looking at how the story has spanned over time, right, we are actually talking about a very large capacity now in our grid, more than 50% of renewable energy capacity, including hydro if we take. how did that all come together, right? There, I would think one of the key things which has been happening over the last, 5-6 years very well is the uptake of the forecasting in variable renewable energy sources, and that's one of the key drivers for that is again generation is a delicensed activity, right? It's all private sector driven. You know that for renewable energy, you don't. It's not a regulated business, which means the more accurate I am in my forecasting, the more upside I have from a commercial gains perspective. So if you look at the private sector so far in the wind and solar sector, they have picked up very strongly on the forecasting, accurate forecasting of renewables. And one key policy enabler over there has been our deviation settlement mechanism and the 15-minute interval, basis participation of renewables in the markets. So that has all come together to somewhere now link that story as to why greater accuracy of renewables is even more critical, because we'll be moving towards more tighter grids, right? 5 minutes, a minute, frequency linked grids. So I think that is something which has started off well for us in India and is only moving towards getting more strengthened. But that also means that that has to connect to the larger story of us building the India energy stack, having more open source data available so that more innovation can come in that forecasting. So that's the phase 2 of innovation if I look at from a forecasting standpoint. The other good thing that I would think that's happening, at least in the Indian grid, is really the base layer of having data together. So if you look at the whole RDSS scheme and the fact of having 250 million smart meter rollout program announced by the government of India, right? That's very ambitious. To be honest, that is really the backbone of anything that is digitalized and AI ultimately, right? So for me, I think that is again a very core layer that we are moving towards. A lot of the smart meter installations are really starting to give the, data that we would like to see from households and business level. So I think that is again a very good move in the right direction. It is now about how do you connect those again to the larger piece about making that data talk to each other, interact with each other, connecting it to the distributed renewable energy sources, be it rooftop, EV and others. So that I would think is the next phase around where we are. Already starting to make some moves, but that's where the real focus needs to go.
Very nice. I like that framework. Mahesh, I want to bring you in as well. Whether in DR, maybe DR is a nice one to focus on from you, specific applications you've seen, and even the ones you've seen scale.
Right. So a demand response is a very interesting articulation of the transition that we are seeing. Firstly, the entire grid has moved from generation following load to load following generation. And that's where the entire variability and the opportunities to optimize the grid itself comes into the picture. And demand response is a very interesting democratization of decision making in the energy space. If a particular consumer base, let's assume say all the air conditioner users in the state of Delhi, if they are ready to participate in some kind of a demand response initiative, it's very important for us to acknowledge that they are actually not only consumers, but they're also prosumers of one sort. So I think demand response to me, it's not only about giving a trigger whenever the grid requires that trigger to ramp down, but more importantly, the entire articulation, Nalin, in my opinion, is now changing and needs to change from demand response to demand flexibility. Wherein if we have more seasonal variation, or I would say diurnal variations in generation coming up and experience in the grid, it's also important for not us to ramp down, but also ramp up selectively. And I think that goes back to the what was mentioned by Siddharth in terms of increased electrification. And that's where some of the end uses, including, for example, foundry industry, which conventionally use biomass, is now moving towards electric arc furnaces. And that's where, again, demand response comes into the picture. So, so the status currently is demand response. There are several programs. I'm sure Abhishek ji, when he comes here, will talk about specific examples from BRPL. But I think the entire narrative is now changing towards demand flexibility. I'll just mention one very interesting solutioning that we came up with, which is being currently piloted by World Bank in the state of Uttarakhand, wherein there is a lot of water pumping load that exists in that state because it's a hilly state. So there is something close to 40% of the entire consumption of that state comes from water pumping. It's a big surprise, isn't it? We would imagine there's abundance of water. But all of that groundwater which gets pumped into the Jal Jeevan scheme, which is the water for all, and has some kind of a storage. So what is currently being leveraged is basically a demand flexibility wherein one can actually bring up the water from underground water tables to the overhead water tanks, and that has inherent storage capacity. So that's basically something which is